I'm going to break the book of Exodus down like I did the book of Genesis. The book of Exodus starts with Jacob's family. We left them at the end of Genesis in Egypt, and we're picking up in Exodus then. It's continuing that story. They're still in Egypt. They're prospering, they're growing. In fact, they're getting so numerous, it's causing problems for Pharaoh. Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph. So you need to go back and you need to know then the story of Joseph. You need to understand, if he doesn't know Joseph, he doesn't know Joseph's God. So what does that mean then for this new Pharaoh we're being introduced? Well, that sets you up then for this incredible story. This whole showdown between Egypt's gods and Joseph's gods. It's going to set up what's it like? Who's the stronger? Who's going to win? Because Egypt has over 500 gods. And the Israelites, Moses, Joseph, they all have one God. So the question becomes, who's stronger? And so Exodus 1 through 12 is basically that whole showdown. It's a fun read. Then you get the time of worship, and you get the people leaving, Exodus 15. And then 16 through 18, these people don't know God either. Pharaoh didn't know them, and they really haven't had a chance to experience God, to have a time to go, do we trust you? Are you trustworthy, God? So Exodus 16 through 18 is basically God giving the people a chance to get to know him. Is he going to provide for them? Is he going to provide enough food? How is he going to provide for the food? And what about the water? And what happens when we're learning to trust you? If I don't trust you all the time, what are you going to do? Are you going to blast me out of the way and just come down in a fury? Or are you going to take care and provide like you did in Genesis? So that's Exodus 16 through 18. Then you get into this other part where it becomes, they're at Mount Sinai, and it's God telling Moses and the people, here's how you're going to be my people. Here's how you're going to be a light to the nations. You have been slaves for over 400 years. You don't know how to run yourselves. You don't know how to govern yourselves. You don't know how to set up a nation. So I'm going to tell you, here's how to be a nation. Here's how to take care of people. Pay attention. How many times God tells them to take care of the people, the slaves, the poor, the widows, the orphans, the foreigners. God is the God who is looking out for everybody. And so he's laying all these foundations down of here's how to be different from the nations around you. And intermixed with that is the whole golden calf, and they sin and they break it, and God says, okay, and there's going to be punishment, there's going to be consequences when you don't always do it right. But the whole point then is then God spends chapters and chapters explaining how to build the building where he's going to dwell. God's ultimate goal is to dwell with his people. So he says, here's what my house is going to look like. You're going to take the time and you're going to build it exactly like I want. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to dwell in the midst of you. Because truthfully, if you think back to the very beginning, that was God's goal. He wanted to dwell with Adam and Eve, and sin created a barrier so he couldn't. And so God says, I've got another plan. I've got another way that I can dwell with you. And it's the tabernacle, which ultimately becomes the temple. When they're done wandering and God says, okay, now we're in the correct, our permanent home. Now you turn that tabernacle into a permanent structure, into the temple. And that's where I'm going to dwell and be with my people. So Exodus, you could break Exodus down and say, it's God redeeming. That's what he did. Exodus 1 through 12 is God redeeming his people. And then after he redeems, they have a transition, 16 through 18, not including that in there, a transition of get to know him, because then God covenants. And then at the end, it's because God wants to dwell. Now that he's redeemed, he redeemed them so he could dwell with them. So as you're reading Exodus, look through that and go, okay, where am I in the story? What's going on? Sometimes they mingle and intertwine a little bit more than I'm making it sound like, but it's God redeeming, God covenanting, because ultimately God wants to dwell. So that's the story of Exodus in a nutshell to help you understand it. Thanks for joining me. Goodbye.